You know, for decades, if you said computer chips, you were basically saying Intel. They were the name, the undisputed king. But today? Well, today, the tech titan is at a massive crossroads, facing a crisis that could completely redefine its future. So, how did this giant stumble so badly? And more importantly, can it get back up? Let's break down Intel's incredibly high-stakes turnaround.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into why Intel isn't just any old company. Its problems are a much bigger deal than you might think. Then, we'll crunch the numbers, and trust me, they're telling a story. We'll even look at a rival's incredible comeback for some context. And then, the fun part, we'll peek into the future at 3 possible outcomes for Intel. And, most importantly, I'll give you the key things to watch for so you can see it happening in real time.
Okay, so first things first. To really get what's going on with Intel, you have to understand this isn't just about a company's stock price or its quarterly earnings. No, this story has massive geopolitical implications.
And that's because, this isn't just about market competition. It's way bigger than that. Think of it more like a strategic chess match on the world stage. And for the United States, Intel is an absolutely crucial piece on the board.
And that brings us to this key phrase, pulled right from the source material: a strategic national asset. That sounds important, right? But what does it actually mean?
Well, it really all boils down to this one simple fact. Intel is the only company headquartered in the US that can actually make the most advanced computer chips. That capability, it's absolutely vital for things like national security and just, technological independence.
So, we've established it's a national asset. But just how much pressure is this asset under? Well, the numbers. They paint a pretty stark picture.
Okay, let's look at the financials. What's really telling here isn't just one number, it's the trend. Revenue is flat, which, is never a good sign. But then you see the net loss. It's ballooned to almost $3 billion. And gross margin, that's a huge indicator of profitability, and it is just cratered. We're talking about the financial snapshot of a company in some serious, serious trouble.
And look, that financial trouble is a direct result of them losing ground, pretty much everywhere. In some stores, AMD is crushing them in desktop CPUs like 92 to 8%. Ouch. They're losing their grip on the super important server market. And in this AI gold rush we're in, they're barely a player, while NVIDIA has something like a 90% monopoly. And don't even get me started on the foundry business, making chips for other companies. They're not even in the top 10.
And you have to understand, these aren't just bad luck or market trends. These are deep internal issues. We're hearing their next-gen manufacturing process, 18A, is struggling with just awful yields. They can't seem to land any big customers for their foundry. They're looking at cutting a quarter of their staff. And the leadership? A revolving door. 4 CEOs in 7 years? That screams instability.
So with all that, is a comeback even possible? Well, to get a sense of that, we can actually look at their biggest rival, AMD. They pulled off what might be one of the greatest turnarounds in tech history.
So what did AMD do right? Their playbook was just crystal clear. First, they went all in on a killer new chip design, Zen. They were aggressive with cost control but didn't gut their research. They made a genius move partnering with TSMC for manufacturing. And, super important, they had stable, visionary leadership with Lisa Su. And maybe the biggest thing, they were perfectly positioned to take advantage of every single one of Intel's delays. It was just a masterclass in execution.
But, and this is a huge but for Intel, here's the catch. AMD's turnaround took about a decade. In today's world, where tech and especially AI are moving at light speed, Intel just doesn't have that luxury. Their window to get this right, it's probably closer to 5 years. The pressure is on.
And that pressure brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. What happens next? So given all these challenges and that super compressed timeline, we can actually map out 3 pretty distinct futures for Intel, say a decade from now in 2035.
And if you look at the probabilities we've laid out here, the most likely path, sitting at 50%, is what we're calling a grinding recovery. That heroic business school comeback story, it's a long shot. And what's really interesting is that the nationalized lifeline has a surprisingly high chance. So let's break down exactly what each of these futures looks like.
All right, scenario A. This is the dream scenario, right? The story they'll teach in business schools for years to come. The heroic turnaround. We're giving it about a 15 to 20% shot.
In this future, basically everything goes right. They absolutely nail their 18A manufacturing.
Their foundry business takes off, actually landing major customers, their chips get competitive again, their financials bounce back, everything. Intel basically rises from the ashes and reemerges as that revitalized national champion.
Okay, now for the most probable outcome, a 50% chance, the grinding recovery. This is the future where Intel definitely survives, but, well, let's just say the glory days are a distant memory. So in this scenario, manufacturing just keeps hitting delays. The whole foundry idea never really gets off the ground for outside customers. They kind of manage to hang on to their core CPU market share, but they totally miss the boat on the AI revolution. They become, well, a stable company, but ultimately a slower, less important player in the industry.
And that brings us to our final and maybe most dramatic scenario. This one has a 30 to 35% probability. This is what happens when commercial failure collides with national security and the government has to step in with a lifeline.
So picture this. The big manufacturing and foundry plans, they just completely fail. But remember, Intel is a strategic national asset. The government simply can't let its advanced chip factories vanish. So it steps in with contracts, with support, and it basically turns Intel into this quasi-public utility that's focused on defense and national needs. The company survives, for sure, but it's no longer a commercial innovator.
So there you have it, a revitalized champion, a slow and steady survivor, or a strategic utility. Those are the potential paths. The big question for all of us is, how will we know which future is actually happening?
Well, over the next couple of years, here are the 5 key things you need to watch. Think of this as your report card for Intel. First, on the tech side, are their manufacturing yields for 18A actually hitting their targets, say over 50%? And are they winning any major customers for their foundry? Then on the business side, can they get their gross margins back up above 40% and keep them there? Can they finally get a real piece of the AI pie, more than 10%? And finally, leadership. Can they just keep a CEO in the chair without another change-up?
The answers to those questions are going to tell us everything. They'll show us whether Intel is on the path to becoming a champion, a survivor, or a utility. And this brings us to the final, really fascinating twist in this whole story. Because of its strategic importance, Intel might actually be too big to fail. So the question isn't if Intel will exist in a decade, it's what kind of company it's going to be.